Hello folks, once again this is Mo from Scrappydogscooters.com. Today we're going to show you how to change a crankshaft in a GY6 150cc motor. Parts are available at www.scrappydogscooters.com. Okay, let's get on with the disassembly. First thing we're going to do is remove the nut off the flywheel. An impact wrench will get this nice and loose, and then you just use a regular socket to pull it right off. Now the next step, we want to make sure you pull the washer out. We usually use picks to help get it out of there. You don't want to leave that in or you're going to damage things when you try to use the tool to remove it. We take our flywheel removal tool, keeping in mind this is reverse threads, means it screws onto the flywheel in a counterclockwise direction. Screw it down as far as it'll go, and then we just simply twist, boom, and off it comes. Now we're going to take and put this off to the side. Now we want to take a 5/16 or 8mm socket and start taking the stator off of here. Okay, we get these two bolts out. Then the next two bolts up here at the top with the bar across it. These bolts here are all the way through the case, and it helps hold this outer casing on. So keep that in mind when we get ready to put it back together. And finally we take the two bolts off of the trigger assembly so that we can get it pulled off. I usually try to keep all the nuts and bolts and everything in one place so I know where it all goes back together. Good idea to have a clean work surface. There we go. Now we just simply take that and set that off to the side here. Now we can start removing the outer case bolts here. Once again, 8mm 5/16 6-point socket. I always recommend using 6-point sockets so that you don't strip the outside of the bolt. Watch as you take these out. There's different lengths. You want to make sure that you lay these in order so you know where you start from, so that when you go to assemble it you don't get a bolt in the wrong place and then have to take it back out and find out the one that goes in there. So it's a real good idea, once again, to keep these in order as you take them out so you know how they go back in. Okay, now we can grab a hold of the cover here, work it off. This exposes our starter clutch, oil pump, and gear reduction for our starter. We got a castle nut here. Scrappy Dog sells a tool to take this nut off. I took a 12-point socket and made my own. Now keep in mind this is a reverse threaded castle nut. So we need to go in a clockwise position to remove it. Get the washer out of here. Grab the starter clutch, pull it out of the way. You'll notice that this is really grooved, so we're going to replace it on reassembly. Now I'm going to take our 8mm 5/16 6-point socket here, and we're going to remove these two bolts holding the oil pump cover on place, protective cover for the oil pump and the chain. Set this out of the way. Take our 10mm and pull the center nut for the oil pump gear, and we simply grab a hold of the gear and the chain, walk it right off, pull it off the crank, set it off to the side. Now we're going to pull the two bolts here, little 5/16 8mm bolts holding the oil pump in place. And while you're doing this, you'll notice that at the top of the oil pump there's a dot or an arrow. On reassembly, that dot or arrow must be pointing straight up. And we can grab the oil pump here, there's the dot I was talking about, and just simply set it off to the side. Now we grab the starter reduction gear with its peg here, set it over here out of my way. And we got two more bolts to remove. Once again, 5/16 8mm 6-point socket. Once again, I'll remind you as we're taking this apart, make sure that you set your bolts with the part that you have removed. These bolts are not all the same length, so you want to make sure that they're going back in the same position. Saves you some time on reassembly trying to figure out what bolts go where. Now we grab a hold of it, we work it a little bit. Sometimes you may have to use a rubber mallet to pop this loose. Here it comes. Now we can lay this cover off to the side, and we got our crank exposed. Now we can grab a hold of the motor, move it around. Want to work the chain off the inner gear inside. Set it up, that kind of helps drop that chain down a little bit. Grab a hold, nice little yank, and out comes the crank. Now we grab a hold of our timing chain here, pull it out of the motor, set it over to the side. Now we're going to take and pop the seal out, our crankshaft seal. And we'll throw that out because we don't need it anymore. Right here you'll see a Allen head screw. We want to take that out. That attaches to the upper chain guide, holds that in place. We want to remove that. The reason we're removing this is it makes assembly of putting the chain back in a lot easier because this is not in our way. Just simply pull the upper chain guide out, put the bolt in it, and set it over here. Okay, now it's time that we reassemble. First thing we want to do is we want to take a brand new crank seal here. Sorry about the picture. And we want to use some RTV or some type of sealant and place around the outer edge of the seal. Use a liberal amount, but don't use a whole bunch, because what we want to do is sometimes these seals don't stay in place because of case wear. So we're going to take and we're going to put that in there. Make sure that we get it started squarely. And take a hammer and gently, going all the way around, tap it into place. Now I'm going to set the motor up on the side here. I'm going to take our timing chain, going to feed it back through its slot that it belongs, and then we're going to take our fingers and we're going to get inside and make sure that it's fully out of the way of the gear that's going to be on the crankshaft when we go ahead and slide the crankshaft back in. Now I've already pre-lubed the bearings of the new crankshaft with assembly lube. I always use assembly lube so I don't worry about dry starts. A little bit of grease there where it meets the seal. Very slowly drop it into place. Work it a little bit, and there it is sitting in where it belongs. Now we're going to take our gasket here, making sure that we set it in with the right alignments, but before we do, we have to cut this section out. This is where the piston jug is going to sit when we reassemble a full motor. Take and set that down. Make sure it's square and in place. And we're going to take our silicone again, and sparingly we're going to put silicone around here. Once again, you don't want to use a lot, just enough to help the sealing of the case because of the imperfections in the case. Now, making sure the rod's in the center of the borehole, we're going to take our case here. There's our machine surface, and we're going to set it down over the crankshaft bearings there. Simply press it down over the alignment pins. Then we're going to take our two bolts. One goes on the inside of the case right here. The other one goes on the outside. Once again, we remember where they went because we set them with the case. Our 5/16 or 8mm 6-point socket. Run these down, and we're going to snug them real good. One thing you want to keep in mind as you get closer, of course, you want to make sure that these are all torqued to specification, which we're eliminating that step for the purpose of this video to save a little time. Now we've got our motor back on the bottom now. We're going to take our oil pump. Remember the dot I told you about in disassembly? Making sure that it's pointed upward. Set our oil pump in place. And we're going to take our two little 5/16 bolts here, and we're going to set them in and tighten them up. Yeah, it likes to slip sometimes. Tighten them down. Now we're going to take our oil pump gear and chain, and you'll notice that it's got a square point here that matches the oil pump drive. Slide it up over the crank onto the gear of the crank there. Put that in place. It's only going to fit one way now, so you got to sometimes rotate this so it slides on. And we take our nut, put it back on, and then snug it down. Okay, now we're going to put our protective cover of our oil pump and chain and set this cover in place. Once again, 5/16, millimeter, 6 point. Don't ever use 12 points because you're going to strip things if you do, and then you play heck taking it apart or getting it tight. Now we'll take our new starter clutch, available at Scrappydogscooters.com, and it's keyed, so it can only go on one way. Get it pushed into place here. Put the washer on, and keep in mind now this is reverse thread, so when we go to put the castle nut on, we're going to be turning it counterclockwise. And we're going to take our special tool here, tighten this down. Once again, Scrappydogscooters.com does sell a tool to do this if you don't want to make your own. Tighten this down. Now we'll take our starter gear reduction unit and its pin. Set it in place. Small gear to the outside. Check to make sure the rotation is good. Okay, now we're going to prepare the outer case here. Already got the gasket in place. I'm going to take a little silicone and go over the outside of the gasket. Keep in mind, use this sparingly. Like I said, we've already set the gasket in there, so use silicone earlier. Kind of speed the video up just a little bit. I think now we can set our cover in place. Now remember, when we took this apart, we set all the bolts where they belong because we've got different size bolts, so we know where they go. A couple of long bolts down here in the bottom, short bolt here, longer bolt here. Up here in the top we got a short one. Keep in mind the 2 bolts in the center do not go in at this time. Okay, those 2 right there, those are left open because that's where the brace for the stator wiring is going to go, and it's already got its own bolts. So now we take our 5/16 8mm 6-point socket, once again harping on 6-point, and we snug all these down. Of course, remember, after you've tightened all these down, that you want to make sure they're torqued correctly. They don't take much torque at all, but you do want to make sure they're even. We hand snug them, and once again I took the torque sequence out because we want to keep the video as short as we possibly can so we could get it published on YouTube. Okay, we're reaching the end now. It's time to put the stator back on, making sure we get our holes aligned correctly. Put our bolts in. Once again, just about everything on this is either 5/16 or 8mm. Snug the stator down into position. got our wiring up between where the two long bolts are going to go. We'll set the top in place here. Now we put our strap in with our last two case bolts, and we're going to tighten them down. Once we get these tight snug, then you're going to want to go around with a torque wrench in a crossing pattern to make sure that you've got them torqued down to specification. Okay, now we want to put our trigger in, making sure that this dot here is pointing towards the stator. If it's not, then it's not going to pick up off the flywheel, and you won't have a trigger for spark to the CDI. Simply put our two bolts in here. And take our 8mm or 5/16 6-point socket and tighten these down. And finally, we're going to take our flywheel. It's keyed. Make sure that the key point goes into the Woodruff key. Tap it on a little bit. Put our washer in place. Our nut. Tighten this down. And grab our impact. Give a quick little boop boop. There we go. Take our fan and put it in place. It's always a good idea to hand start all this. When you tighten these down, make sure that you tighten them your last sequences in a crossing pattern. You notice I set them in that way to start with. And we take our 5/16 8mm 6-point again and snug them down. Sure they're good and tight in a crossing pattern once again. And this concludes this video on how to install a crankshaft in a GY6 150 or 50cc scooter motor, buggy motor, ATV. Be sure to visit www.scrappydogscooters.com for all your performance and OEM parts for your scooters, ATVs, and buggies. We have other videos available to show how to install a big bore kit, which would complete the build on this motor. Once again, thank you for watching. This is Mo from Scrappy Dog Scooters.